Boys.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to our presentation over the next 45 minutes to an hour on the 2022 cost outlook for parking structures and a little deeper dive into construction budgeting. Again, thanks everyone for joining us for this little look behind the curtain on our analysis for the publication that we put out every year. Every year for nearly 20 years, we've published our cost outlook, and we always get great feedback from everybody. It's well received, and we get one or two hate mails every year. So for today's presentation, we wanted to kind of dive into to some of the analysis and sausage making behind it. And then maybe dive a little deeper into the some of the specifics that make up the hard and soft costs. I'm Rob McConnell, one of the principals in WGI's parking group. Been a parking guy for 28 years and counting, and did a little stint at the DOT before that. My partner here, Ray.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Raymond Smith. I'm with the WGI Indianapolis, Indiana office, and I am the Midwest parking market leader. And like Rob, been doing this a long time, for over 25 years, been a parking consultant.
All right, so we got the whole US covered here. Here's just a quick snapshot of where WGI is right now, but you blink your eye and we may have an office open in Wyoming or South Dakota or who knows where next time. So WGI, for those of you that may not be familiar with us, we are a multidiscipline transportation focused planning and design firm. Ray and I are both in the parking group, and the parking group is the old legacy Carl Walker parking group from that some of you may know from times past. So here's our agenda for today. We are going to again, like I said, dive into the sausage making that is our cost outlook, how it's calculated and how to apply it properly. And then we're gonna take a little deeper dive into construction cost, the actual pieces that make up garage construction cost. We're going to talk about soft costs. I know in our article we kind of push soft costs off and say, hey, you got to figure something in for soft costs, but this is going to be a little bit better explanation of that. And then one thing that we don't talk about necessarily in our article is what the ops and maintenance costs are, and so we'll give you a little flavor of what that might be. Like I said, we've been doing this a long time. I'm a pack rat, and I was digging through my files in my file cabinet in my office, and I found a hard copy of the original cost article dated December 2003. So we're right at 19 years. Next year will be our 20th anniversary publishing this, and as you can see, the old one's branded Carl Walker, the new one's branded WGI, just to kind of make that bridge and continuity again. For what it's worth, just for fun, back in 2003, when we first published our cost article, garages, the national median cost for a parking garage was $11,315 per space, as compared to this year, where we're almost $28,000 a space. In square footage terms, that was $35 a square foot for a new garage, versus $83 a square foot, a little over $83 a square foot today. For those of you that are math nerds, that's a 247% increase over 19 years, which works out to about 4.86 annualized. If you take out the last couple years, where we had literally from 2020 to 2022, we had 25% increase. That actually puts you down somewhere closer to the 3% inflation rate that we were seeing kind of overall. I'm gonna turn it over to Ray to let him talk about the proverbial sausage making. Just be aware it's very numbers heavy, so hopefully you got to make sure that you're well caffeinated to stay awake and follow this one. Take it away, Ray.
All right, I'll try to keep it pretty simple and high level, but it is a little bit of math. Well, how we calculate our national median cost of a parking garage really starts with our database, which we've been collecting data on all the garages we've done since 1986. And that's hundreds of new parking projects, thousands of data points. And these are some of the important data points that we collected on each of the parking garages that we designed. I highlighted a few here that are most important. As you see it still there on the screen, which is number of spaces, the total square footage, and so forth. Here's just a sample, right? You see right here is a sample size of 14 projects, and these 14 range from back in 1989 to 2019. It includes both cast in place and precast garages, and both small and large in this little small sample size from 200 to 1,400 spaces, and it covers 10 different states. And those arrows there are just highlighting some of the most important items that we need in order to calculate this national median cost.
Yeah, this is a direct snapshot out of our database. I actually did a screen cap of it.
So when we dive a little deeper and just look at one particular garage, and we're going to use this garage to try to explain to people how we create the data that makes up our overall cost article. So this garage here, it's Montgomery College. It's the north garage. It was bid back in April of 2014. So that's important when it was bid. It's built in Rockville, Maryland. That's near Baltimore. Baltimore has a city index of 92.8. And that'll be important here in a second. The overall garage was 918 spaces and over 308,000 square feet. Another important data point here is the ENR building cost index of April of 2014, and that's 5357. And I'll show you how we use that information here in a second. So the overall garage cost around $23.3 million. And when you calculate the cost per square foot, it was over $75 a square foot and over $25,000 a space.
Yeah, that 23 million is the cost back in for 2014, just to be clear.
Yes, absolutely. So the next step.
All right, here, let's see if I can advance the slide here. Come on, guys. Down. Uh-oh. What's going on? Technical difficulties. Page down. Oop. Uh-oh. All right, hang on a second. Now you're really seeing behind the curtain here. Escape. Ray, do a little song and dance while I figure out.
Yeah, really what we're going to do with this data, and I'll kind of explain a little bit why Rob's getting into the next slide. The whole idea is to take all of this data and first bring all the data forward to today's dollars. So no matter when the garage was built, we can bring all the projects forward to May of 2022. That's when we published the cost article.
All right.
So the very first thing we'll do by bringing the dollars forward for each of the data points is looking at the building cost index, ENR's building cost index back in April 2014. As I said earlier, that number is 5357. And we use that number to bring all of the costs forward. So you can go to the next slide.
All right, maybe. What the heck? Yeah. Again. There we go.
So we're going to calculate what we call an escalation factor. And what it really is you just take May of 2022's ENR building cost index. That's when we wrote the article. So that was at the time the current building cost index. And you divide that by the original building cost index of 5357, and you get an escalation factor. For this particular garage, it's a 1.453 escalation factor. So then you just simply multiply that factor by the original cost of the garage back in 2014. You can see when you do that, that garage today would cost $33.83 million. And the cost of that garage would be $36,848 per space and over $109 a square foot. So the next step is to normalize that data point. We've already brought it forward to today's dollars. And so now we have to kind of normalize it to the national average. And we do that by comparing the city index of Baltimore to the national average of 100. And so you simply just take the national average and divide it by the city factor of Baltimore, which is 92.8, and you get a location factor, which is 1.078. And now you just simply take that location factor by the recent numbers that we just calculated by bringing the garage forward to today's dollars. And so when you do that, when you normalize this garage that was built in Baltimore, you get a national average cost of that parking structure is $39,000 a space or $118 a square foot. So the two things we do, we escalate it, which basically means we bring it to today's dollars, bring it forward, and then we normalize it. We do that that was just one garage. We do that for all the hundreds of garages that we have in our database. And so that's how we calculate the national median. And as Rob said earlier, in May of 2022, the national median was $27,900 a space and $83.21 a square foot. So how do we use that number? Rob's going to go through an example of how we use that number.
Sure. So just in my hypothetical here, let's say I want to build a garage in Columbia, South Carolina, and don't ask me why I picked Columbia, South Carolina. It just popped into my head one day. And so the first thing I would do is, every year we publish this list of cities and the associated costs for the various cities. And there's nothing magical about this list of cities other than, it represents a good chunk of the biggest metropolitan areas in the US. So, the first kind of pass through, I'd say, okay, well, Columbia is not on the list here, but it's kind of near Charlotte. It's about an hour and a half south. So what is Charlotte's numbers, and do they make sense for does $24,329 a space, $72.50 a square foot make sense for Columbia? Maybe it works. But Charlotte's got a lot more population density. It's a good bit bigger than Columbia. It's got a higher cost of living. It might be close enough, but let's dial it in a little bit specifically for Columbia, excuse me. So if you have a copy of means, also I think they changed that. I think RS means is officially now Gordian, I think is how they publish it now. But if you happen to have a copy of the latest RS means data, you can go to the tables in the back and find the city cost for Columbia, and the last version, the last go round, Columbia was 85.3, had a city factor of 85.3. If you don't have access to the Gordian publication, you can get the cost of living index for Columbia online, and while it won't be exactly the same as what's in Gordian means, it should be pretty close. It'll get you close enough to do some budgeting. Anyway, once you know that, you can multiply the national median cost in our publication, the $27,900 per space, and the $83.21 per space by the city factor, or the cost of living factor, as the case may be, and you come up with something a little closer to $24,000 per space, adjusted to and again, that's the May 22. So this is pegged to May when our publication came out, adjusted to Columbia, South Carolina. So now you want to take the May cost, what you have that value for May 22, and so now you got to inflate it to whenever you think you might build this garage, to get you a reasonably accurate budget. And while we've seen, somewhere in the mid to, low to mid threes for annualized cost escalation, everything I've read recently says the costs from 2022 to 2024 are gonna escalate greater than we've seen historically. Likely somewhere in I've seen predictions that range from about 5% to upwards of 7%. And so just for conservatism, let's use 7% inflation.
And Rob, that makes a lot of sense because I just looked up the September building cost index and ENR.
Yeah.
And since May, when we wrote the article, it's went up about 2%. A
Okay,
quarter.
well,
That's for one quarter. So that would kind of equate to, 7-8% for the year.
Perfect. So, I'm not saying this is the crystal ball projection, but it's, it's a best guess at this point. So if we were to build this garage in 2023, if we were going to say, well, I'm budgeting now for something that I'm going to build in 2023, I'm going to project, 1 year's worth of inflation between today, actually, when I wrote this, it was September, but it's October. So maybe it's actually a hair more than that, but I'm going to inflate that number that we calculated on the previous slide up 7%. And I'm going to have a budget, hard construction budget, somewhere around $25,500 per space, almost $76 a square foot. So hopefully that makes sense. Anybody lost at this point? Yeah, okay. So somebody asked the question earlier, and Ray was talking about the Baltimore City Index at 98%. Does that city index of 98 mean it's 98% of the national average of 100? That is correct. So yeah. Baltimore, at least when RS Means did their calculation, Baltimore, the construction costs in Baltimore, labor and materials, were approximately 98% of the national average. And then the second part of that question was, why would we increase? Well, when we were calculating, when we're trying to normalize numbers to the national average, we would, because the cost to build in Baltimore for the Montgomery County example, or the Montgomery College example, excuse me, because the construction costs were slightly less than the national average, we want to inflate them to the national average. And then there was another question that popped up. Should you also adjust from May to September? Yeah, I mean, depending on whenever you want to peg that, depending on whenever you want to peg that number to a construction budget, yeah, you would inflate it accordingly. So our number that we publish, at least in 2022, is tied to May. So whenever you want to, to what extent you want to inflate that number to, you would figure out what date, project out what date you want to build your facility, and then inflate accordingly. And then somebody else asked, why is a garage in Puerto Rico so costly? Yeah, that's that's a good question.
Supply chain and lots of issues with that. We actually were part of a garage in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and a lot of issues with building something in San Juan.
Yeah. And then the last question that just popped up was, how will the impacts of Hurricane Ian affect construction costs in the Southeast? Well, that's a good question. I don't know that we know the answer to that until they have a pretty good assessment of what the damage is and what the demand on the supply chain and everything for repairing that. But I suspect, given some of the imagery that we've seen and everything, that it could put a strain, at least in the short term, on the supply chain and on construction, just the availability of contractors, especially residential contractors. Now, one of the things about building a garage is you're usually not dealing with a residential contractor. These are, heavy commercial contractors building things out of concrete and steel. So, all right. Where are we here? Ray, you want to take a little deeper dive and explain, some of the caveats associated with this number?
Yeah, sure. We want to kind of explain that our national median garage is kind of an average garage. It doesn't include something that's got a lot of bells and whistles to it. It's something that is fairly straightforward site. Sometimes, the garage is located fairly close to a major street or something. So fairly straightforward site work. Geometry is pretty straightforward. The exterior facade is nothing elaborate. It's a pretty straightforward facade. We'll show you some examples here in a second. One key item that we want to point out is our database is based on above ground garages. Underground garages are a whole different animal, and they can get really expensive the deeper you go into the ground. Our cost
Ray,
article. Yeah.
Hey, Ray, we got a question here about, do we have any data for below grade garages? And the answer is yes. And
yes.
If I had to throw a number at you, just for talking purposes, I would say that as soon as you start going below grade, you're at your minimum 50% more, probably closer to 100+%.
Yeah, an old rule of thumb that we've always kind of went by, and it's been pretty effective, is that if you're doing one level below grade, you take the national average, and it's about a 50% premium. When you go that second level below grade, you have two levels below grade, it's about 100% premium over the national average. And then a third level is about 150, and then it kind of just maxes out. If you have a 4 or 5 level garage, you can get up to a 200%, increase in the cost. That's why we don't include it. But we track all that data. When we do an underground garage, we can pull all of our underground garages and look at that data separately as well. We also look at the average size garage. So the average size of our database is 500 to 800. So if you have a really small garage that might be in the 200 to 300 space garage, we'll add a economy of scale factor that's greater than 1 because it's small. And of course, if you get to a big garage that might be 1,500, 2,000 spaces, we'll do just the opposite. We'll give a reduction factor on that. So that's kind of what we do. That's why we kind of want to caveat the average size, because the real small ones and the real large ones, we have to make some adjustments. And then in a basic garage, usually have a couple stair towers, an elevator tower, and this data is kind of based on, very little occupied space, retail space under the garage. I'll just give you some examples of what a national median garage looks like, so you don't get a misconception of what that is. Here's just some examples of both precast and cast in place garages that you would get that kind of met the national median.
These are the ones that land literally right on, within a few $100 per space of the national median cost, and within within 100 spaces of the national median size. The national median size is probably 660, something like that, right in that area.
That's why we gave a range there. Yeah.
So these are not horrible looking. They're not something you want to hide, out back somewhere. They're pretty decent looking, and some of these are a little older, and some of these are pretty darn new. That Westminster Station one is just a few years old.
And that's kind of why the garage that's in the background behind me, the Montgomery College garage, was a little bit above the national average, because it has a pretty elaborate facade. It's a beautiful looking garage, but would be above kind of the national median.
All right, so everybody on board? Looks like we got a few more questions here. Let me see if we can address them. Let's see. Isn't using garages built last century actually reducing average garages, since garages today have more features? Yeah, it's a fair question. again, we're adding garages every year, dozens of garages every year to our system. And if we only use garages from 2000 on, wouldn't the average be higher? It depends. I mean, we're still doing a lot of pretty basic garages. There are more features that can be included, parking guidance systems, for example. But on the flip side of that, a lot of the garages we're building don't have access control equipment, for example. So they're balancing concepts on both sides of the equation. I think our data is still valid, and I think it still plays out. And as we add, we're 20 years past 2000 now, and as we continue to add, it'll weight heavier and heavier that direction. But I think it proves itself out reasonably. It is a tool, and it plays itself out there. It proves itself out reasonably well. I got a question here. It says, do these costs represent soft costs as well? No, they don't. And we'll get into soft costs in a little bit. And then I got a question about what's the premium from going precast to cast in place.
That's kind of a trick question, isn't it, Rob? Because it really depends on the market. In some locations, we bid a garage both ways, and cast in place in certain markets have come out to be cheaper. It really depends on the market, the location, how close the precasters are to the site that you're building on. Do you have a lot of competition both ways? Do you have a lot of precast competition in that area, or do you have a lot of cast in place? Here in Indianapolis, Indiana, the old rule of thumb is when you get over about 600 cars, cast in place becomes cheaper than precast here in Indianapolis, because we have a lot of high quality cast in place contractors here in Indianapolis, and they really, bid each other down. So it really depends on the market. But if you want a historical number, Rob, you can jump in there if you disagree with my number, but we've normally seen about a 3 to 5% increase in cast in place over precast.
I mean, historically, that's probably a fair assessment. I know, like now, for example, a lot of the precasters are backed up, and I'm hearing stories of 1 year out for bed space and everything else. So cast in place garages start becoming economical when you factor in schedule and lag and so on. So yeah, again, and other things that make precast garages really want to be very modular, very regular shaped, very rectangular, and to create those efficiencies associated with the pieces that the precaster is going to make. If you start getting into oddball shapes or curves or things like that, then cast in place becomes much more economical. So
but they both got their place in the market, and like I said, we probably do half of each. We do pretty balanced year to year, it seems like.
Okay. Is anybody adding electric chargers? Yes, everybody's adding electric chargers to their garage. I'll mention that a little bit later. Question, considering all challenges, construction costs, and recession that's arriving, do you see a trend on more renovation and less new parking garages in 2023? So that's an interesting question. I think there's a certain segment of the market that will probably trend that direction. But there's still pent up demand from institutional clients and
healthcare
and healthcare
infrastructure money. Yeah, so
I don't, maybe in the private development side of things there might be a flattening, but on some of the institutional and public clients, I'm not, at least not yet, seeing any kind of pullback. And there's plenty of federal money that's being dumped into the picture that's helping to fund some of this stuff too. Another question, do you explore steel framed options? Yes, we have. Ray mentioned that we do about half and half cast in place and precast. It's probably something like 98%, precast and cast in place split evenly, 49%, and then maybe 1 or 2% structural steel. There's some challenges with structural steel associated with durability and maintaining them. There's also challenges with fireproofing. Basically, concrete has inherent fireproofing abilities, but steel has none, and so you end up having to, do something fireproofing or into mescent paint or something to fireproof them. So it becomes a little bit more. They become more expensive to construct and more expensive to maintain. Also, if you're, you generally don't want to use stay in place metal deck in a garage just because it captures the water and causes corrosion of the deck and of the freeze thaw damage to the concrete. So there's challenges associated with that. I know in certain markets like the Pacific Northwest, they use ventilated deck and some other things, but in any case, we do occasionally look at steel frame. More questions. Have you done an analysis to determine the accuracy generated by the budget cost using described estimate method to the actual bid cost? Yes, these are actual bid costs that we're plugging into our budget or into our analysis, and yeah, it's informed by that, and it historically proves itself out. Once you factor in some of the different caveats that we put in there. Another question: has the meteoric rise of construction costs for traditional parking structures finally cleared a path for mechanical parking facilities? I don't think so. With a mechanical parking facility, you still have the structure that houses it, and the cost of mechanical parking facilities has escalated with everything else. Just in very broad terms, it's a 50 to 100% premium for mechanical parking structure. Mechanical parking structures also have a limited. There's some limitations associated with the throughput, the amount of cars that you can get in and out of a parking facility, based on the number of elevators and whatnot. So there's challenges associated with that. So I think autonomous mechanical parking or automated mechanical parking facilities have their place in certain instances, but in terms of their broad use in the US, it's still pretty limited. Have we ever used metal studs with EFIS on a prefab panelized system? I have one time. I am not the EFIS generally, given the exposure and everything, has its challenges. And then another question: early in the presentation, you showed a mean index for Baltimore of 98.2, I think. When was this dated? That was April 2014. So that was when the facility was bid, when the Montgomery College structure was bid. So that's what links it to the city at that time. All right, no more questions right now. Let's see. So I'll jump back in here. I know we're about halfway through our time and cruising right along here. So we've explained a little bit about our analysis and how to apply our analysis. Now I just wanted to give you a very broad, sort of 40,000 foot elevation view of the different components that go into a typical parking structure construction. And for this conversation, we want to think about everything, or we generally try to think about everything in terms of the way they're organized by the Construction Specification Institute, CSI. The CSI 50 division specification system is how most projects in the US are bid, and those of you that are in the design industry or those of you that have been involved in construction projects are probably familiar with this. But each one of these divisions covers a different type of building component. Division 3 concrete, Division 4 masonry, 5 metals, and so on. And the ones that I've got listed here on the screen are the ones that generally make up the components of a garage construction project. So why do you want to use, why do we want to think of it in terms of, in terms of the CSI format? Well, if for no other reason than the standard billing process for construction projects is to use the AIA, the American Institute of Architects payment forms G702 and G703 for a contractor to bill a client for work, and the AIA forms are organized in accordance with the CSI format. So everything kind of meshes together there, and this is just an example of the continuation sheet, the G703 sheet from a typical construction project, garage construction project, and you can see how it's broken out. This one is a precast project, and he's got numbers for double T's and shear walls and slabs and so on, all under Division 3. So how do those different components break out for in relation to the overall cost? Well, no surprise here. I think concrete, everything associated with concrete, the formwork, the rebar, the actual concrete material itself, various accessories, post-tensioning systems, precast. If you're buying precast, that makes up 40 to 50% of the vast majority of parking garage projects. Everything else is as I'll go through, everything else is pretty small potatoes compared to that big number. Masonry, for garages, we're not doing a whole lot of masonry. It's usually just something for a building support room enclosure, like a elevator equipment room, or an electrical closet, or a fire entry room, something like that. Metals. Now the metals, this component doesn't cover the rebar and the concrete. The rebar and the concrete is part of the concrete number. The metals would be any kind of miscellaneous steel that you have, elevator hoist beams, ledge angles, sills. If we have any kind of roofing system over, with metal roof, bar joists or steel deck. And then occasionally we get into like aluminum handrails, and certainly most handrails and guardrails and stairwells are metals fall into this category. It's about 2 to 3% of the overall price. Durability components and waterproofing is the major durability component. I mean, there's a durability components associated with the concrete mix, admixtures and air content and all that sort of thing. But in terms of the waterproofing systems, it's 1 to 3% of the overall cost, and this would be your joint sealants, your expansion joint sealants, your penetrating sealers, any sort of deck coatings and membrane systems, roofings, flashing, all that sort of stuff. And there's a little bit of a cost differentiator between precast and cast in place. Precast deck is going to have a substantially larger number of joint sealants to install and maintain over the years. Something to consider when you're looking at those. Doors and windows. Now, depending on how much glass and facade treatment, curtain wall type facade treatment that you might put on the garage, that can amount to a fairly significant cost, 5 to 10%. Generally speaking, in environments where we have freezing and thawing, we want to keep the moisture out of the stairwells. We always want to try to keep the moisture out of the elevator shafts. That that can be a major issue, as our restoration guys can attest to. And so, again, doors and windows can amount to somewhere around 5 to 10% of the construction cost, depending on how widely used they are. I guess if you're building a garage in Florida where it never freezes and you're doing open stairs and whatnot, maybe that's a much smaller number. But again, this is a sort of a national average, if you will. Finishes. This would be, when I say paint, I'm not talking about the striping paint, because obviously every garage, 99.99% of garages are striped with parking spaces. Some of them we wonder how often they're striped, because you can't see the striping anymore, but that's a different story. In this case, I'm talking about painted ceilings, painted walls, stains on the ceiling, to brighten up the interior space. And as my percentages suggest, it can be anywhere from nothing. We don't do any sort of interior finish painting to some pretty significant interior painting, up to 5% of the overall cost. Painting these days, last time I checked, I think it was about $2 a square foot sprayed on. The parking specific specialty components, signage is usually a pretty small piece of the puzzle, less than 1%. If I, for a normal size garage, if I were to just plug a number in it, I might do $10,000 a floor or something like that. Parking technology, depending on how robust your parking technology is, it can get up to 1 to 2%. If you put a full-on parking guidance system in with individual space sensing and whatnot, it could be as much as, say, $500 a space these days, which is not an insignificant cost. Elevators are expensive. 2 to 3% of the overall cost just for that single component. The other thing about elevators is elevators tend to be on the critical path in terms of schedule. It takes forever to get an elevator, and you really have to, get those plugged in early in the construction process, and buy them out. Let's see, we got a couple more questions here. Actually, let me finish up my thoughts on the breakdown here. Mechanical, plumbing, fire protection components. Really, you're talking in most garages, you're talking about dry stand pipes and floor drains. And so it's a pretty small component, maybe around 3% of the total cost. $1.50 to maybe as much as $2.50 a square foot. $2.50 a square foot for that. I will say that for those of you that are operating in IBC 2021, the latest version of the building code has a requirement that all garages greater than 48,000 square feet now require fire sprinkling, regardless of whether they're open or enclosed. So that's a cost that will have to be factored in, and it is not factored into our cost analysis at this point. So just keep that in mind. Other aspects of the mechanical system, if you got, there's always a little bit of HVAC to keep electrical rooms cool, or elevator equipment rooms heated. In certain environments, snow melt systems are required. The electrical and telecom components, somewhere after the concrete, this is the next biggest item, somewhere in the 6% to 12% range, depending on the complexity. The biggest piece of this is your lighting system. The second biggest piece of this, somebody was asking about electric vehicle charging stations. Right now, electric vehicle charging stations can add somewhere around 2 to 3%. As more and more state and local requirements for EV capable and EV ready and EV installed construction come into use, this is going to go up. And then the civil component, somewhere around 5 to 10%. This is, demolition and earthwork and any sort of site improvements and paving and connections to sanitary and storm detention systems and all that sort of fun stuff. And then lastly, once you've tallied all that information up, you got to throw on a little bit for the contractor to mobilize. That's for him to get his forces out on site and put up a fence and, get some equipment and, pay, a little bit of initiation or initial expenses to get his forces in place. And then general conditions are usually somewhere around 5 to 10%. That's the contractor's monthly cost for staff and for the trailer and for his vehicles and equipment dedicated to the project. Temporary signage, temporary water, insurance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then on top of that, everybody wants to make a profit. There's nothing wrong with that. So 5 to 10% over and above. And that's the very high level breakdown of the different components that make up a garage's hard construction cost. Now I've got some questions here. Let me see if I can answer them. It's a question about what is my view of using 2 to 3 car elevators in the parking garage versus traditional ramp design, or 2 to 3 car elevators in the I assume you're talking about like a hydraulic
mechanical parking.
Well, I think this is basically referring to a hydraulic elevator, basically a freight elevator that would get a car up in the deck. I've done a handful of those, literally one. I could probably count them on one hand. Challenge with that is those are very expensive to install and maintain, and they're also very, very, very slow. I would not encourage a car elevator system for anything that had, more than a few dozen cars in it, just because they're very, very, very slow. Another question: are decorative metal screens at the perimeter factored into your metals percentage? Somewhat, some amount of exterior facade treatment would be in that few percent cost. But if you get something very comprehensive like that image behind Ray there, the Montgomery College job, then that would be over and above the typical parking garage. And remember, we're talking about sort of a national median cost here. We're not talking about every specific instance. Our solar panels, photovoltaic panels on parking garages also factored in. In the Southwest, this is common. No, this would be something that would be in addition to the cost of there's in addition to the national median cost of a garage. Are we able to talk about difficulties in getting garages financed? Don't lenders require major cash up front? Yeah, that's a little bit beyond the scope of this particular presentation. Be happy to talk offline about that. Another question about my comment earlier about the fire sprinkling for anything over 48,000 square feet. That's a 48,000 square foot footprint, correct? Not total occupiable space. So anything of greater than 48,000 square foot footprint in 2021 requires fire sprinkling. How about exhaust emission systems? When you have an enclosed garage, you are correct that enclosed garages require mechanical exhaust. And that is atypical for an above ground open air parking garage, which is what our national median cost is. Any idea of the demolition cost of a parking deck?
$3 to $5 a square foot.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. The last one I completely demo was a few years ago, but it's somewhere in that range.
Mm-hmm. That's what my guess would be.
Yeah. Can we get a copy of the slides? Absolutely. Does the cost per space or per square foot account for ramps? And do you include the ramp area in calculating costs? Absolutely. Anything that any piece of the structure that you're building, that would be included in that cost. And then another question, will we receive a copy of the session? Yes, you absolutely can. All right, Raymond, we're coming up on the final here, so we got to zoom through it.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about soft costs. These are all the costs that are above and beyond, the bid cost from the contractor, the hard cost. And one of the first items of the soft cost is the design fees. And that can range from 4 to 8% depending on the size and the complexity. Some of the other things that factor into soft costs would be material testing and special inspection that you have going on. Some of the things we just talked about is real estate and financing cost, insurance and fees. That also factors into this overall soft cost. Owner management, a lot of projects we're involved in, the owner's got their own management team, their owner's rep, all that figures into soft costs, and that varies depending on how much involvement the owner has. And then owner contingency, this 3 to 10%, depending on the size of the garage. For very small garages, it's closer to 10%. For very large garages, it's more closer to that 3%. But these are things that owner directed changes would fall into this category. Any unforeseen conditions like an environmental soil contamination. Sometimes you can get unique weather conditions. That all kind of factors in to the contingency cost. Drilling down a little bit into the design fees, I'll kind of break down what makes up the overall design team fees. It starts with the prime consultant. That's the consultant who manages the project and is the point of contact for the owner. A lot of times that's the architect, but a lot of times on parking garages, that's the parking consultant. I know we've been prime on multiple garages. The architect, they're designing the facade, the layouts of the stair elevator towers, doing the life safety and then all of the occupied space and doors and windows and roofing and so forth. The structural engineer, he's kind of doing the bones of the design, the bones of the structure, I'll say, all the items that helps keep the garage up and standing. And that's the foundations, the slab on grades, the superstructures and so forth. The parking designer, they're doing all of the parking layout, the ramping schemes, how you're going to circulate the garage, both vertically and horizontally. They're laying out all those ramping schemes and circulation patterns. They're also defining the wayfinding and vehicular signage in the garage. And as Rob touched on, they're specifying, which is what we do, specify all the parking technology items, being the access, revenue control systems, all the parks, gates, ticket spitters, and all that. We also do all of the parking guidance systems that helps you guide your way to your parking spot from start to finish. Then there's the drainage and durability designs. It's all about laying out the garage, since we're out in the weather and people drive in snow and ice and everything. We've got to drain. We got to lay out these garages to drain well. So that's a very important item, locating the drains and figuring out all the floor slopes to get the water to flow properly to the drain. And then detailing all the waterproofing systems, being the sealants, the sealers, the traffic barrier membranes, those sort of things. And then durability design. It really comes into play the more northern you get. If you're where I'm located here in Indiana, in the Rust Belt, its durability is highly important. Designing the life of the structure to match what the owner wants to get out of that. And a standard garage these days has a service life of about 50 years, but we've done them to have a 75-year life and also done a 100-year life. Usually those are ones that are below grade garages that have occupied buildings up above or designed for future bed towers or whatever it might be. So that's durability design. The MEP engineer, he's doing all the HVAC, the electrical, the lighting, and all the plumbing. He also does the fire protection. The civil engineer, he's doing all the site civil items, you know, the roadways that bring you to the garage. So he's doing pavements, curbs, sidewalks, and that sort of thing. And then your landscape architect or designer, they're doing all the hardscapes, the pavers, stuff like that, and then all of the plantings that go around the garage.
All right.
And this is kind of just a breakdown. This varies from project to project, depending on if you have a lot of civil or not very much civil, if you have a lot of landscaping or not very much. Complexity of MEP, those percentages will go up and down if it's above ground garage or a below grade garage. But that's kind of the normal breakdown of normal design team fees for a parking garage.
All right. Thanks, Ray.
Yep.
We've got just a handful more slides, and I know we've got about 4 minutes left here in our time, and we're going to lose a bunch of you. So I'm going to breeze through these, and then there's a handful more questions I'm going to try to answer before the end for those of you that want to hang around. So we talked about the construction cost, the hard construction cost. We talked about the what makes up the components of the hard construction costs and the different materials and the contractor fees and everything else. And Ray talked about soft cost, the things that are over and above the hard construction costs, and dove a little bit further into design costs, and how the fees break out. Before we leave you guys today, I wanted to talk a little bit about operating costs, because there's a once you build the garage and pay all the money to build the garage, that's not the end of it. You still got to spend money to keep everything in operation and keep your level of service and your customer base happy, whatever that customer base is, over the entire life of the garage. And I've broken those different expenses into basically 3 broad categories. The first broad category is utilities. By far, your biggest utility expense is going to be electrical or electricity, to keep your lights on, to keep your elevators running, more and more to keep your cars, your electric vehicle charging stations operating. I know the latest guidance from the Parking Consultants Council, of which I am a member, is the static capacity level 2 charging, at least having the EV capable of 20% of the static capacity, which is a massive increase from what we've seen in the past. So yeah, EV charging is going to be more and more of an expense. Other kind of related ancillary utility costs would be the electrical costs for HVAC and parking guidance, but also your cost for your internet service to keep your equipment, your parking access control equipment attached to the network and talking to the facility management system. There's always a need for a little bit of water in a parking garage, whether that's for irrigation or for wash downs or for just to clean up a spill here or there. And then trash service. And then I've got a little bullet over here about reductions. I mean, there's potential ways to offset some of these costs, but somebody mentioned solar panels, PV panels earlier. So maybe you put PV panels and you're able to reduce your electrical costs a little bit during the day when it's sunny. You might have a gray water system to where you're able to capture gray water or rainwater and reuse it for irrigation. So there's some opportunities to mitigate some of those costs. The second major expense, operating expenses, your labor cost. We're past the days where, you have a cashier in the booth in most instances, but you still have a fair amount of labor associated with any particular project. You got to have somebody to monitor your intercom system, and your emergency phone system if you have one. You gotta, if your an open parking garage, without gates. You got to have somebody to enforce your parking and make sure that people are paying that should be paying, or people are parking in there that should be parking in there. You've got, daily, weekly, monthly, semi-annually, janitorial expenses. You've got routine maintenance. That would be, for, fixing the odd patch, patching the odd spall, touch up painting, changing the broken light fixture here and there. Most garages, and most parking operations have managers that have to manage all these things and schedule all these things. And then, of course, valet is another expense, in certain operations. The last is a very broad category, just everything else, taxes, insurance. If you have third-party security, fire alarm system and monitoring. Parking equipment these days, most of it is provided, or a lot of it is provided as software as a service, SaaS, to where you're not, you may not even actually own the parking equipment. You may be, it may be part of your agreement. But typically there's a pretty hefty monthly or annual fee associated with that you've got to pay every month. You've got cleaning and maintenance, beyond, it may be service contracts associated with that. You've got an elevator or escalator service contract. You've got, in the Northeast and the upper Midwest, you've got snow removal. You might have landscaping and so on and so forth. So a lot of additional expenses that factor into parking operations. So how does this break down? Well, this is I'm going to say a median cost, everybody's situation is going to be a little different depending on the level of service and staffing you have, and what part of the country you're in. But we've polled a number of folks who own and operate garages, and this seems to be about the right ballpark per space per year. Total of about $495. This additional expenses category, the $125 in additional expenses, typically includes a little bit of an escrow for long-term maintenance. I mean, every 5 to 10 years, you're going to have to replace most of your, much of your waterproofing systems. Every so often, you're going to have to do concrete repairs. If you got a precast deck, you're going to have to do, double T flange repairs. So you need to escrow some amount of money. But this is, it gives you a sense. And again, this is a little bit in a vacuum. What does it cost to operate and maintain a garage? It's about $495 per space per year. All right, we are actually 3 minutes beyond our time. Appreciate everybody's patience. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to try to answer these last questions, but if you got to go, I totally understand. Quickly, here's one that says, sorry if this question was already addressed. Is there a difference for flat levels with a center ramp versus helix versus double helix? Obviously, the complexity of the framing system influences things a little bit, but our analysis kind of bakes all that into one thing, so it ends up being a composite number. What are the costs of suicide prevention treatment? Ray, do you know what you guys have done in the past for?
Those can range from anywhere from $10 to $15 a square foot for simple fencing to $30 to $40 a square foot, depending on how elaborate you might get with wrought iron type stuff.
Okay. Median square foot of a typical parking structure. Well, in our analysis, the median efficiency for a parking structure is about 335 square feet per car.
Yeah, I'd agree.
And I think our median size is 662 or something like that, if I remember correctly. So that would put the median size of a parking structure somewhere around 220,000 square feet. Usually they're about 5 levels. The median height's 5 levels. I don't know how useful that is, but that's where we are. Any thoughts on using design build? Yeah, about probably a third of what we do is design build. It certainly can be cost effective. It takes a little bit out of the design control out of the owner's hands and puts it more on the contractor side of things, but there are pluses and minuses to both. Or to the three major delivery methods: design, bid, build, and construction manage. There's pluses and minuses to all of them. Which design, architect, and engineering services does WGI offer? We offer all of them, but we do partner with local partners, design partners in a lot of instances, just to get the right local flavor and participation. Is there a premium if the garage is for buses? Absolutely. Buses cannot be, by definition, an open parking garage. So there are mechanical ventilation requirements and fire sprinkling requirements and limitations on size and so on that come into play for that.
And the weight, the design of the garage has to be enforced to carry the buses.
Yeah, much heavier load, closer column spacing, etc. Is the terms of value engineering, is the term value engineering, what are the big ticket items one should consider to reduce cost? Yeah, that's a conversation, that's going to be specific and dependent on what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, the easy way to reduce costs is to take square footage out of the garage. That's I know all of our VA hospital projects required deductive alternates of up to 20%.
20%. Yeah.
And you take off three or four items, that amount to almost nothing, and then number 5 to get to 20% is we got to delete the top floor or the top 2 floors. So it's there's parking garages generally don't have a lot of fluff in them. Life expectancy of parking structures, as Ray mentioned, most of them are 50 years, but we have designed for longer than that.
75 or 100. So we've done up to 100.
John Hammerslag says my operating costs are lowball. Yeah, okay, John. You're in Chicago, so that's a revenue management, operating cost, bank fees. Yeah, that's all part of that. Again, it's
in that soft cost category.
Yeah, well, now in the operating cost,
okay.
Fees, credit card fees, third party. Again, that's going to vary depending on where you are, but in terms of sort of median operating cost, that's those are things that would go into that. We omitted the graphic designer for signage and professional fees. Yeah, most of the time we don't have a graphic designer, although I work with them occasionally. Ballpark premium for garages for buses, I would say, just for talking purposes, go with 2x. I think I did a cost estimate for those a few months ago, and I can't remember the specifics, but I think it was close to 2x. And then what's the average footprint of the typical garage? That's a good question. I'd say if there's a sweet spot for a garage, it's probably a 3-bay by 300 feet long. So whatever, 183 by.
Yeah, that 300 feet long is ideal because you can get a ramp that's in that 5% range, and you got be able to have in-bay parking of 45 on each end. So
yeah, so somewhere in the 55,000 is probably the generic footprint. So anyway, that's all the questions. Hey, thanks. Appreciate everybody's patience. I know we're about 8 minutes long here. If anybody's still around, appreciate you tuning in. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate. Interestingly, we've got my email address and we've got Ben Sands, who's a good contact too. Ray's is the same format. Ray.
Yeah, it's just raymond.smith@wginc.com.
Yeah, raymond.smith@wgi.com. Thanks all. All right.